Just as a general notice, I try to simulcast as much as I can on Substack, YouTube, and X. So now we're also live on YouTube and X. Remember to go to my Substack if you're not already subscribed, bentracy.net. Just to give a little rundown for people who didn't see the Substack version, and I'll post it on Substack. I honestly was interested, and people, I mean, if people have a criticism of me and it's in good faith, I'll listen to it. But honestly was interested in having a respectful, friendly discussion with Tara, who I know has a strong investment in the Epstein case. She had this association with Virginia Giuffre, with whom she recorded a podcast in 2020. She was in regular communication with Virginia Giuffre. And I will freely acknowledge I maybe have a different perspective than her, but like that's why you converse with people. And Tara, if you're listening and you want to come back or rejoin or do it another time, I mean, honestly, that's my intent here. Not any kind of ambush, nothing like that. And so I guess the question which apparently caused her to leave the stream prematurely is that I asked her, just in terms of journalistic ethics or journalistic philosophy, how does one evaluate the credibility of a source such as Virginia Giuffre, again, central Epstein accuser, central to the generation of public interest around this matter going back a decade? If, in light of Virginia Giuffre having conceded in a civil litigation settlement that she had falsely accused one of the people to whom she claimed that she had been sex trafficked on 6 or 7 separate occasions, does that not constitute something that should be taken into consideration? I mean, I'm it's that's at least a question that ought to be answered, right? But instead of answering it, she accused me of having been like recruited by Dershowitz to sick her or to sandbag her or something, which is totally false. I've talked to Dershowitz before. I think it's probably been 2 years maybe on a totally different matter having to do with actually the Trump prosecutions while he was out of office. I was working on an article, so I spoke to Dershowitz. I spoke to him like a handful, maybe of other times prior to that. Very little about Epstein. There was one podcast that I did do with him in 2019, if memory serves, where it was primarily supposed to be about the Mueller report and potential impeachment of Trump around quote unquote Russian interference in the 2016 election stemming from the Mueller report. Dershowitz had actually wrote the foreword to a book version of the Mueller report. And so I invited him to come on like a little podcast to have a discussion about that. And then on his own volition, he actually brought up Epstein and, discussed it for a little bit, even though I didn't even really prompt him on it. So, I mean, that's the full extent of my relationship with Dershowitz. I mean, this idea that I'm in some underhanded relationship with him, and that's why I invited Tara on the show or on the stream, is not correct. Again, like, if somebody can give me an argument for why it is that it would be considered unfair or offensive or whatever to simply ask her how she reconciles her ascriptions of virtue and credibility to Virginia Giuffre with this admission of Giuffre that she had falsely accused someone for almost a decade. I'm all ears as to why that's an unfair question. I think I was respectful. I don't know. Maybe I'll go back and watch the video and see if there's anything that I can critique in terms of my own performance. But anyway, that was strange. So now that I'm here and I had a whole stream planned, I'll go over a few other things, and terms of what I wanted to ask Tara. And look, I mean, I get it. From her perspective, she considered Virginia like a personal friend of sorts. She viewed herself on like a sort of a mission with Virginia Giuffre for obtaining accountability. She um, sort of has interwoven Virginia Giuffre with her own journalistic mission, meaning Tara's, given how prominently featured she is in the 2020 podcast and how often Tara describes her. I'm not trying to discount that perspective. I would like to better understand it. And you better understand things by openly conversing in a respectful way, I would have thought. Um, but she apparently left. And there you go. I mean, for people who try to tell me that I never attempt to engage with anybody who might have a contrary perspective to me on this Epstein matter, first of all, I have done it on multiple occasions, voluntarily and proactively. And tonight was just another example. And I guess you see how it went. Um, I was also on, bizarrely enough, amusingly enough, Ben Shapiro's show today. That was a new one. Of course, the topic was Epstein. And people can go look up that if they'd like as well. But, if Tara's out there, or she's hearing this, or I mean, I'll email her again, or I'll contact her again when I get off this, and just reiterate what I've said here. But here's a few other things that I was going to ask her, and this is again not meant to be an ambush, or I don't have like an ulterior motive here. Like I have, there's genuinely, to the extent that I'm aware of my own motivations, or that I have access to my own conscious thought. Maybe there's something like deep subconscious that is like deceiving me. But to the extent that I'm aware of like what I'm motivated by, I'm not voted by any like nefarious motive here. Um, what I'm motivated by is my belief that there are a lot of aspects to this story that have not been adequately aired and vetted and covered. And we're now in like week 3, right? Or what is it? I can't even keep track of time anymore. It's now been like 2 weeks or more. It's been more than 2 weeks since, right? Am I getting that right? So it was July 7th that the thing came out. It's July 24th. Yeah. So more than 2 weeks since the DOJ FBI memo came out declaring that effectively the Epstein investigation was over. There was no quote unquote client list. There was no predicate to criminally charge any third parties. And it created this firestorm that only seems to grow by the day, with new developments every day. So, yeah, especially given that reality, if there are under-examined aspects to this story, in my considered judgment, you're free to disagree, but my considered judgment is that there are severely undercovered aspects to the story that I think would change people's understandings if they were more openly and publicly aired. So that's where I'm coming from here. And I do think that there is an issue with excessive credulity being extended by journalists, by people in the media, to some of these purported victims of Epstein. Virginia Giuffre being one of them. Virginia Giuffre, as Tara established when I asked her at the top of this interview or this stream, Virginia Giuffre was absolutely central in galvanizing the popular narrative around Epstein. She's the one who made the marquee sensational claims when she filed a motion for joinder to an ongoing victims' rights lawsuit in late 2014 and claimed that she had been sex trafficked to Dershowitz, to Prince Andrew, and also a vague category of other prominent individuals whom she did not name, but she said that they included foreign prime ministers and presidents and royalty. Um, and she's been involved in copious, extensive litigation for the better part of a decade, for maybe, for a decade essentially. And it's her who informed the public's development of their whole conception of this matter. So, again, pretty straightforward question. If this is somebody with whom you recorded a podcast as sort of an advocate in 2020 on journalistic grounds, and then it came to pass that 2 years later, this same person had to acknowledge that she had falsely accused someone of heinous child sex crimes. That seems like something that you should be obliged to reevaluate, correct? Or at least give some kind of explanation for how you process that information. And then as to Giuffre, there's some other stuff that, if I had a chance, maybe I would have brought up with Tara, would have also gotten to this issue. Like, how can one reasonably judge the credibility of this person who Tara affirmed was absolutely central to the whole construction of this story in the popular imagination? It wasn't just Dershowitz whom Giuffre accused of having been sex trafficked and then recanted. It was just Dershowitz who litigated the matter to its full conclusion and extracted that public statement in which Giuffre, represented by David Boies, a high-powered lawyer who was like an arch nemesis of Dershowitz. It was Dershowitz who saw that process through to its full legal conclusion from his perspective and to his satisfaction. Because remember, Dershowitz had emphatically denied that he had ever even met Giuffre, much less had illicit criminal sex with her. I just want to give you an example. So if you're watching on YouTube or X, I'm able to share my screen. Hopefully Substack can get it together to at some point figure out how it is that we could just stream directly onto the Substack Live app through StreamYard in a more reliable fashion. I've been begging them to figure that out forever, and it doesn't seem to ever happen. Okay, so here's what I'm going to show you. And I have, Tara suggested like I need to read more material. I've read an incredible amount of material over the years. Like, yes, I've been more immersed in it for the past several weeks because it's the number one news story in the country and is like rocking the administration. And every day there's some new development and Trump says something crazy or he denies something and what have you. So yeah, I acknowledge that I've done more lately, but I've at least followed this as an interested party for a decade. So if you can see that on in the screen there on YouTube and X. So here's what I had. I have these are excerpts that I clipped out or cut out from a memoir, a manuscript of a memoir that Virginia Giuffre said she wrote. Let me give you some context on that. In 2011, Virginia Giuffre, for the first time, made a public statement about her experiences with Epstein by way of a Daily Mail journalist, Sharon Churcher. And Virginia Giuffre was paid $160,000 for that 2011 Daily Mail article, in which she provided an interview. And then she also provided the now notorious photo of herself with Prince Andrew. The authenticity of that photo has been disputed. I'm not claiming that I have the means to dispute the authenticity of that photo. It may well be authentic. I'm just informing you that there are disputes as to its authenticity. It's also true that Prince Andrew settled. He settled a lawsuit with Virginia Giuffre in 2022 and paid her a lot of money. How did he come to settle that lawsuit? Interesting question. People have speculated. Andrew obviously hasn't discussed his reasoning in public because his his handlers and the royal family and whatnot have, I'm sure, um, vigorously imparted on him that he should not discuss this matter in public after his disastrous, from a PR perspective, interview on the BBC in 2019 that caused a whole sensation. Um, so those are I'm willing, everything that's in evidence, everything that is in the record, I will acknowledge, even if it would seem to conflict with anything that I've said. I try to be as wedded to the facts and evidence as possible, genuinely. So here is a memoir that Virginia Giuffre wrote because after she participated in the Daily Mail feature and was paid rather handsomely for that, $160,000 for giving an interview and providing a photo, she then continued to communicate with the journalist who was encouraging her to come up with a book proposal. And the journalist was offering to help her find an agent, a literary agent. And the idea was that given the people of high notoriety that she could potentially discuss in a book or a memoir, that could potentially get her a hefty, lucrative book deal. And this has all come out as exhibits in discovery and in litigation. I mean, this is not me like speculating or saying I heard this. I mean, there's an enormous amount of material in the public record on this. And for a number of years, Giuffre and her attorney, her high-powered attorneys, who made an enormous amount of money themselves from their involvement in the Epstein matter in a whole myriad of respects, they had petitioned the courts to keep sealed this memoir, this manuscript for a memoir that Virginia Giuffre wrote. Obviously, the opposing parties in that litigation wanted the courts to unseal this because if it became public, they would believe, by their lights, this would show something maybe disadvantageous to Giuffre. And that's probably why Giuffre's counsel sought to keep this concealed. So here's an example of what I'm talking about. She cites here in this passage that, this is her talking about her purported or her claimed experiences on Epstein's island in the Virgin Islands. So she says, 2 weeks later, as if Giuffre was trying to lighten my spirits, he told me I was going to his island to meet a new client. He is a Harvard professor named Stephen Redacted. Now, a lot of online sleuths on Reddit and elsewhere seem like they have probably identified who that Professor Stephen Redacted is. I can't confirm that with 100% certainty, so I'm not going to say the person's last name. But you could Google around if you want to see what I'm talking about. Virginia Giuffre goes on, I would be spending 2 days with him, showing him around the island, dining with him, treating him to a massage whenever he wanted, etc. Without Giuffre even verbalizing the need to have sex with him, he told me to keep him happy. Okay, so then she goes on, and it comes to pass that she's giving a massage, she says, to this Harvard professor named Stephen Redacted. And eventually, Virginia says that she had, quote, intercourse with this person. Okay. Now, fast forward. Dershowitz, the dreaded Dershowitz, who I guess we have to discount everything he's ever said about this because I don't know, he's pro-Israel. Well, okay, I'll disagree with him on Israel then. I'll disagree with him on a whole host of things. I don't know why people can't like make distinctions in their mind between a person potentially being credible on a certain thing, and yet you still have differences of opinion with him on another thing. Like, shouldn't adults have the capacity to do that kind of reasoning? Ideally, perhaps not. But anyway, um, Dershowitz, in one of his declarations, cites this excerpt from testimony of Giuffre in a defamation lawsuit. Right? So this is a deposition of Giuffre. Have you ever met the same person, Stephen Redacted? Virginia Giuffre says, possibly. Question, do you know one way or another? Answer, do I know, she asks. Question, you said possibly. Answer, she says, I was introduced to lots of political, scientific, academic, so there is a possibility I could have met him. Question, did you ever have sex with Professor Stephen Redacted? Virginia Giuffre, no. Okay, so this is an example that's not anywhere near as widely known as the Dershowitz example, and even the Dershowitz example is like chronically under recognized, I would argue, in terms of what it says and what it casts doubt on as to this whole issue, which is the credibility. What it cast doubt on, clearly, I don't know how anybody could argue otherwise, is the credibility of the signature accuser, whose claims inform this whole belief that there's this expansive child sex trafficking operation that Epstein was enforcing by blackmail. That stemmed from fundamentally Virginia Giuffre's claims. And so maybe there's like a modest amount of public awareness of the Dershowitz thing, meaning that Virginia Giuffre had to admit that she falsely accused Dershowitz of child sex crimes for nearly a decade. But here's one that's buried in all these files, all these litigation records that Tara was kind of suggesting I hadn't properly read or analyzed. And here's Virginia Giuffre saying, no, she did not have sex with the very person whom in her memoir she said that she had intercourse with. And there are many other data points here that I would think any rational person or fair-minded person would have to concede, at least contribute to injuring the credibility of Giuffre. Like if she makes grandiose claims of having been sex trafficked to a whole variety of people and then subsequently retracts them or recants them or claims she never said them, or like there's no real consistency in these claims that she's made and that have drawn such massive public attention and outrage and formed the basis for people's core beliefs on Epstein. I think people ought to be talking more about that. I mean, again, maybe this is because I'm like some craven, I don't know, person with ulterior motives, but again, to the best of my ability to understand my own motives, I don't think that's what I'm motivated by. I think it seems pretty sensible to me. It goes on and on and on. In 2011, in that Daily Mail article, she conveys to the journalist that that Giuffre was paid for. She conveys to the journalist that Giuffre was not maintaining that she ever engaged in any sexual activity with Prince Andrew. Later on, she files suit against Prince Andrew. There's obviously a massive tsunami of horrible publicity that's embroiling the royal family. The Queen, who is still alive at that point, Prince Andrew's mother, is heading into her Jubilee year, meaning it's the the 70th year of her reign. Is that right? Or what was the Jubilee year? It was 70 years, right? Queen's Jubilee year. Yeah, the 70th anniversary of the Queen's reign. And Andrew is probably disinclined to taint that Jubilee celebration for his mother, the head of state of Britain, and beloved national figure who's been the queen for 70 years. Probably does not want to taint her jubilee, her 70th year anniversary, the 70-year anniversary of her reign, with allegations that her son is a child sex predator, trafficker, etc., by pursuing litigation strategies that would have protracted the litigation for some indeterminate period of time. So if Andrew were to get some kind of exoneration or were to extract some admission from Virginia Giuffre that she had wrongly accused him, just like she eventually had to admit of Dershowitz, Andrew would have had to pursue extensive litigation for an indeterminate period of time, and it probably would have become a public embarrassment would be an understatement. It would have been a total nightmare for the British royal family and for his mother, who was like, what, 95 years old? So this is all just to say you could understand the reasoning for why he would settle. And obviously he's got the resources. The British royal family has, like, who knows how many millions stashed away in various accounts and assets and whatnot. So look, I mean, again, it's fair to acknowledge. I'll acknowledge it. I'll acknowledge any fact that's in the record. Fair to acknowledge that Andrew settled, but I think there's some other potential context that people might want to be aware of before they just immediately assume that therefore indicates that a child sex trafficking operation obviously existed and is being covered up by blackmail or whatever the version of the theory is now. Because look, I mean, you would think that a competent attorney, right? I mean, my impression is that Andrew was not getting very good advice, not getting very good counsel. They were in over their head. And at a certain point, the imperative became, look, having him go to the United States and stand trial amidst a total conflagration of horrendous PR would just not be something that the British royal family and his mother could countenance. And therefore, he said the idea was just simply settle. We're going to structure the settlement in such a way that some about $3 million of it will ostensibly go to an NGO to combat sex trafficking. Just so happens that was Virginia Giuffre's NGO, and didn't seem to really do a whole lot as far as I could tell, as far as any evidence that anybody can ascertain. And one thing I wanted to ask Tara before she left was Virginia Giuffre's NGO, anti-sex trafficking NGO, got $3 million from Queen Elizabeth II in relation to this Prince Andrew settlement. And what did it do exactly? Like, what happened to the $3 million? $3 million US dollars? I forget what the current, how that would translate into British pounds. What was done with that money? Because if you go to the website of Virginia Giuffre's NGO, it's called SOAR, SOAR. It's an acronym. Obviously, she's deceased now, so it's a bit different in terms of like how I would ask the question. Or I wouldn't ask what is Virginia actively doing, obviously, with that NGO because she's deceased. But like, what did it do between the time that it received the $3 million from Queen Elizabeth II and Virginia's death? Look on the website; it just seems like a repository of Virginia Giuffre's occasional media appearances. It still solicits donations and has a message up saying, "Look, we're a work in progress." I mean, I'll show it to you. SOAR. sometimes I forget that I have this wonderful function. Here we go. Okay, so this is the current version of Virginia Giuffre's anti-sex trafficking NGO. SOAR stands for Speak Out, Act, Reclaim. She previously had a different anti-sex trafficking NGO that she ran, on whose board was this person named Eliza Blue, who, I mean, there's so many rabbit holes here, but like Eliza Blue, again, sorry, if people don't want to hear it, if they think it's cruel, if they think it's nasty, all right, turn the stream off then. But like Eliza Blue, who worked with Virginia Giuffre at the earlier iteration of Giuffre's anti-sex trafficking organization, was another admitted sort of fabulous and scammer. Virginia Giuffre, Eliza Blue was somebody who was initially elevated by Elon Musk as some kind of authority on how to fight child sex trafficking on Twitter. And she would take credit for these amazing new tools that were supposedly being created to fight child sex trafficking on Twitter. And nobody could ever identify like what precisely she had ever done, or like why precisely Elon Musk was praising her as so helpful, other than it was clear that at least for a time she had like a direct line to Musk, and Musk was really into proclaiming how intent he was to ensure that there was no child pornography on Twitter, still called Twitter at the time. Look, I'm opposed to child pornography to the degree that there's any actual child pornography on Twitter. Yes, of course, purge it, get rid of it, and law enforcement should determine what the source of it was so that they can prevent the further creation of any genuine child pornography. I mean, I think we're all pretty much in agreement there, if we're sane anyway. But it was never clear like what Blue really did, other than eventually it became clear that she was just sort of puffing herself up to exaggerate her influence. And she did have this like connection to Musk. She had a direct line to Musk and Twitter management. Like what did she do with that? Well, what she eventually ended up doing was she got people banned on Twitter for posting screenshots or posting videos from a music video that Eliza Blue appeared in like 6 years prior. So I'm talking about now early 2023. And she was getting people banned for posting a music video that she appeared in, I want to say 2016, somewhere around there, in which during the very same time that Eliza Blue claimed she was being sex trafficked and enslaved, she was appearing in rap music videos, shaking her bare ass and seeming like she was doing it on her own volition as an adult. And so that kind of cut against her credibility that she was this like survivor of sex trafficking. And so Virginia Giuffre had this person as the director of the previous version of her anti-sex trafficking organization. I'm just saying. And now we have this version that got the 3 million from Queen Elizabeth. Okay, so what does this organization do? I mean, does it tell you anything that does? Okay, we see that the board consists of Virginia Roberts Giuffre. Okay, that was pretty self-evident. Somebody might want to update this, indicating that she is now deceased. That might be a good idea. And look at the partners here. So here's one. Can you see this? Let me zoom in. The partners of this anti-sex trafficking organization just so happen to include a bunch of law firms with which Virginia Giuffre has been affiliated in relation to her many years of litigation around Epstein issues and her acquisition of enormous settlements. A generous percentage of which these law firms receive. So of course they would love to advertise their affiliation with Giuffre and all her efforts to ostensibly combat sex trafficking. Why the hell not? Boys Schiller. There's one. So let's talk about Boys Schiller for a moment. David Boys. Look him up. Google him. One of the most prominent, powerful attorneys in the country for decades. I think he's in his 80s now. Um, he represented Al Gore in Bush v. Gore, the Supreme Court case that decided the 2000 election effectively. So, just to give you some sense of his prominence. And he ended up representing Harvey Weinstein at the dawn of Me Too. Okay. So at the dawn of Me Too, David Boies was representing Harvey Weinstein and employing aggressive tactics on behalf of his client, let's say. So there was a need perceived to sort of rehabilitate David Boies' image. And he comes to represent. So that was 2017, roughly. And he comes to represent Virginia Giuffre. Why not? Chief Epstein accuser. This will show how committed David Boies, in fact, is to defending victims or what have you. And they just so happen to be victims that can make claims that could result in litigation that could then generate astronomical revenues for David Boies' firm. Edwards Pottinger is another one. Bradley Edwards is a lawyer who was involved very early on in Epstein-related litigation in Florida. He's represented, I don't know how many Epstein purported victims, and made a whole lot of money from his involvement in this. And these people are these law firms are quote unquote partners and are quote unquote contributing in-kind support to an anti-sex trafficking NGO that is supposedly based in Australia. Okay, so what did this organization do? If you could see, it doesn't seem to have even been updated since the website wasn't even updated. Appears not to have been updated since 2021. Virginia Giuffre died in April of 2025. So like, here, let's just we'll click around. Okay, let's see. Get involved. Okay, what? Okay, coming soon. When you click on the website for ways to get involved with this anti-sex trafficking NGO that received $3 million from Queen Elizabeth II, it says, coming soon, we'll let you know what to do at some time in the future. And then never was anything revealed as to how visitors to the website could get involved. Get the facts. Okay. What are facts? Well, so what are the facts? Like, what are the facts that this organization is uniquely in a position to educate us about? Well, they give us the U.S. State Department's definition of sex trafficking. Okay, I think I could probably find that elsewhere, right? Like on the State Department website. They let us know that, reliable statistics related to sex and human trafficking industries are difficult to gather and analyze. Well, that's for sure. But they give us some very bare bones information on that. They link to this organization that puts out reports on what they call modern slavery, where they make astronomical estimates of how many people they claim are being trafficked worldwide. 40 million was the estimate in the 2017 report. I think it got, if I'm not mistaken, it went up to like 60 million in the years after, but I have to go check. And like, if you look at what's the methodology for that number, it like makes absolutely no, it's like a projection of a guesstimate of a something. Just to be clear, people, am I claiming here that no one on planet Earth is ever coerced into being transported from point A to point B, and over the course of that coercion may be additionally coerced to engage in some kind of sex act that is not within their full consensual will? No, I'm not denying that. Just saying that we have this whole NGO industrial complex, which just pumps out these insane numbers and they can cite those numbers on their request for philanthropic giving from their sponsors. And then hardly is there ever even any kind of like audit as to what these organizations actually do. So, like, and how are they defining what it means to be trafficked? I guess they include now um, forced marriages, which okay, I mean, I'm open to an argument to that effect, but we want to be, I think, a little bit rigorous in how you assess the veracity of these claims. So, okay, so what else is on the site? We have the National Human Trafficking Hotline. They provide that. Okay, there are some news stories related to Virginia Giuffre and her lawsuit against Prince Andrew. Okay, and then you can sign up for their mailing list. Okay, so maybe I'm being unfair. Let's click on need help and see what incredibly valuable resources are being provided to victims of trafficking thanks to the $3 million that this organization received from the British royal family. Need help. What? So if you need help, it says you should go to the National Human Trafficking Headlines. You should go to some other organization. Interesting. So there's no help, quote unquote, that can be obtained through a service that this organization itself actually provides. Okay, so what? Somebody explain to me. Other than to create a website that collects Virginia Giuffre's media appearances, gives some information on human trafficking or sex trafficking that could be Googled and copied and pasted in about a half hour. And other than that, apparently offers nothing. And there's even questions that have been raised as to whether this organization was ever registered as a charity in Australia, which would have been legally required. There seems to be no record of this organization ever having been registered as a charity in Australia. Okay. So then where's the $3 million? Look, I think that's a reasonable question to ask if we're evaluating the credibility of this person, Virginia Giuffre, as this supreme authority on the Jeffrey Epstein matter, and whose grandiose claims, whose shocking claims of illicit sex trafficking to a whole constellation, just amazingly prominent people, if those are to be found credible by us, if the public should view the Epstein matter through the lens that Virginia Giuffre is the one who initially introduced, and look, I mean, you got to sort of scrutinize her as a public figure, as a public advocate. And she was she was overt. She was open about presenting herself as a public advocate. That's why she participated in that podcast with Tara, where they jointly did this mission together to track down people who Tara and Virginia reckoned could provide information to them about Epstein's activities and Maxwell's activities. So I'm going to give you now another thing. All right, so enough of that for now. So I'm not going to give you another thing that I had planned to ask Tara about. Look, I wasn't expecting her necessarily to stay on with me all night, but like to just leave in a fit of anger or resentment, I did not expect. After one question that was just very mildly, I wouldn't even say critical. It was just a commonsensical question. I wasn't even trying to impugn Tara herself at all. This was about somebody else. This is about Virginia Giuffre. I know Tara has this association with her and perhaps bond with her, but sorry. I mean, if you're a journalist and you're going to be holding yourself out as a journalistic authority on this issue, then I think you should be able to answer some skeptical questions as long as they're delivered respectfully, right? And frankly, even if they're delivered rudely, I field all manner of rude questions. Look, and I know not everybody has my bizarre psychological makeup, but you sort of see my point. Um, and so here's what I also here's another thing I had planned to ask Tara. So on this podcast that Tara did, it's called Broken. People can go look it up. It was in 2020. Tara and Virginia go around to California, to Florida, maybe elsewhere that I'm not thinking of at the moment, maybe New York. I know for sure California and Florida, to see if they can locate witnesses who would essentially testify as to their knowledge of Epstein or Maxwell. And Tara and Virginia's reason for doing this is framed as just a pure, unvarnished search for truth, which I don't. I'll be all in favor of. I would be all in favor of on principle. I agree with everybody who's been clamoring for maximum disclosure of all Epstein files. Put it all out. But do you know why? I mean, do people realize why a large cross section of those materials continue to be concealed, particularly by federal judges, but also by the DOJ? Because there are statutes and there are customs and there are subjective assessments made by judges and law enforcement figures that to release certain materials that are in the possession of the court and or the DOJ and FBI, to release those materials would infringe upon the rights of purported victims or could be adverse to the government's interests in some other respect. What are the government's interests, at least as far as we know? As far as we know tonight, July 24th, I qualify with that because Todd Blanche, the deputy attorney general, was said to have gone to Tallahassee, Florida today to meet with Ghislaine Maxwell. I don't know if that happened. I would have to check the news. I mean, if a commenter knows, let me know. But in the past few hours, I haven't checked. But let's say as of yesterday, as of July 23rd, we knew with a fair degree of like virtual certainty that one of the government's interests in relation to the concealment or disclosure of various outstanding materials that are in at least the court system is that the government is in the midst of an appeal process with Ghislaine Maxwell. She was convicted in 2021 of a sex trafficking conspiracy. Remember, the sex trafficking conspiracy, as alleged by the government and as alleged by the 4 victims the government called to testify in that trial, consisted of 2 people. The sex trafficking conspiracy for which Maxwell was convicted consisted of 2 people, herself and Epstein. And Maxwell has been appealing the conviction, appealing her sentence. She's been in the midst of a now several year long appellate process. Her appeals have been rejected in the lower courts, and now like she has this long shot appeal for under consideration by the U.S. Supreme Court. The U.S. Supreme Court, as people might know, only take a very, very, very tiny percentage of the cases that are submitted to them. So whether the court will grant cert, whether one of the judges or the justices will grant cert and agree to consider this case, probably doubtful, although you never know. I mean, maybe Clarence Thomas or Samuel Alito is feeling adventurous. Actually, let me revise that because I think the justice whom would be granting cert or not would have to do with the district that the appeal was filed in. I would have to go and double check. Maybe I'm a little off on my my facts there, but either way, it is sort of a bit of a Hail Mary. Could happen, but a Hail Mary that the Supreme Court would even take this up and that they would vacate her convictions or agree with her appellate lawyer's arguments. Also, even probably lesser of a remote possibility, but again, not impossible, which is why they go through the process. And so, what is the government's interest now? Well, they obtained convictions on certain grounds, right? In 2021, the government presented a certain case against Maxwell. To make the case against Maxwell, the government produces evidence that it claims incriminates Maxwell for the charges that they brought against her. And over the course of a criminal trial, especially when it's high profile as that, the government prosecutors don't just dump out every possible piece of evidence that they have obtained, right? They make a case. Obviously, there's discovery and there's litigation over what evidence can be used or not, but at least in theory, the government is required to provide evidence to the defense that could potentially be exculpatory. But Maxwell's appellate lawyers argue that she was deprived of the opportunity to present evidence that they claim would have been exculpatory, or at least would have worked in her favor and maybe affected the verdict that the jury eventually rendered. So these are arguments that are supposed to get litigated in the context of an appeal. And so the DOJ has an interest. The government writ large, I guess, let's just generalize for a moment. The government entities that have possession of quote unquote Epstein files that have not yet been publicly disclosed, whether they're under seal or protective order or whatever. A significant percentage of those are continuing to be concealed because the claim is that to release them would unduly injure or harm purported victims. That's the claim. It would be nice to see the actual files so we can evaluate whether the government is making a credible case as to why it's concealing the documentation or other forms of evidence, right? So that's why I'm personally fully in favor of all disclosure. Sure, put it out. Let's do it. But don't continue to conceal any and all information simply because it might cause some subjective disturbance to a purported victim. Or in other words, don't use the claims to privacy of purported victims to conceal all manner of material, which could be highly illuminating as to the case that the government brought against Maxwell or a whole host of other matters in relation to this never-ending, sprawling Epstein saga. So another thing I wanted to ask Tara, I don't know, she's around. I know she was tired. She told me, and look, I mean, I get it. I wasn't going to keep her on for forever. I would have been very as accommodating as possible. Here's one thing I wanted to ask her about. When she was going around with Virginia Giuffre for this 2020 podcast called Broken and attempting to identify persons that Virginia Giuffre said that she had some interaction with at the time that she was in the orbit of Epstein. So when she was roughly 17 to 19, although even the dates and how old she precisely was at a certain time or during a certain incident, even that's been like extensively, almost tediously litigated, and precise factual elements get disputed. But let's just say, for the sake of argument, around the time she was roughly 17 to 19 or 18 to 20 or somewhere in the range, right? The premise of this podcast, or at least some episodes of it was that Tara would accompany Virginia in her quest to reconnect with these sort of ancillary figures that she knew or was acquainted with when she was in Epstein's orbit. It's presented as just like a quest for truth. I'm all in favor of truth, but I want to give you a quote here that I was going to ask Tara about. Again, with respect, this is not an ambush. This is like a one journalist, and I'm not saying I'm the most masterful journalist who's ever walked the earth, but I've done probably enough journalists to at least use that term to describe myself. Talking to another who's a big public authority, to her credit, on this issue that's like dominating American politics right now. It's like a giant. It's like it's the summer of Epstein. Who'd have thunk? Last year was Brat summer. This year's the summer of Epstein. And so, yeah, relevant aspects to this ought to be discussed in public without fear or favor, right? So here's how Tara, in this podcast, frames the motivation for her accompaniment of Virginia Giuffre in seeking out these figures from Giuffre's past, or these figures whom Giuffre claims she was acquainted with and could know things about Epstein and might have certain information that could benefit victims. That was sort of the premise. So Tara says, quote, "What Virginia really wants is for someone who was there to say, 'I remember you. What Epstein did was wrong and horrible, and I'm sorry that was your childhood.' She isn't looking to sue anyone else. She simply wants acknowledgement of the abuse." Then Virginia says, "Giuffre is dead. As you know, we're not coming after you criminally. We're just coming after you for answers to help." So they're sort of framing this as just benign requests for help that then is in some vague sense could be used to help quote victims down the line, although that's not really clarified with any specificity as what that would entail. So they go and try to track down sorry. They go and try to track down, for example, somebody who worked as Epstein's a personal chef at the ranch in New Mexico, who then became a prominent chef in Hollywood. I think he worked for or with Jimmy Kimmel. I'm blanking on the guy's name now, but that wasn't really what I was focusing on there. And then they also try to track down Epstein's personal pilot. So a pilot that flew one of Epstein's private aircraft, Larry Vikoski. So they identify Larry Vikoski's address and they attempt to go to his property and speak to him. And Virginia Roberts gets on like an intercom system, or maybe it's a phone. I'm not 100% sure, but like she's trying to deliver a message to who she thinks is Larry Vikoski on the other end of the line. And she says, "This is Virginia Roberts. So I used to fly on the plane all the time with you guys. You remember the first time? Like you and guys put me in the cockpit and with you and David, and I was like, this is a roller coaster, and it was so much fun from Florida to New York. And anyways, I'm here with reporter Tara Palmieri, and we're going on like this mission, and I wanted to talk to you about it, like some of the stuff that you might remember. But I just remember you as this like super cool guy." Now, this person, Larry Vikoski, Epstein's one-time pilot, does not um, fulfill Virginia Giuffre's request. But did you notice anything there? Did you notice how Virginia Giuffre was putting that request just to have a chat. I think she might ask him, like, "Can we go have lunch or something?" As though she just wants to reminisce about old times. She says she's asking him. She understands him to be on the other end of the phone intercom. I would have to go double check. Sorry, I should have had that detail recorded. She she asks. She's basically asking this guy, "Do you remember when you flew me around from Florida to New York? It was so much fun." What would the relevance of that be? That would prove an interstate nexus. If Larry Vikoski, the guy that they're just kind of cold calling and asking if he'd like to have a friendly little chat about old times, she's asking, she's trying to invite him to potentially acknowledge that he was a participant in an interstate operation of some kind, quote unquote, interstate trafficking, perhaps, or sex trafficking. Because remember, the federal government, by and large, in order to charge a trafficking crime, needs to establish an interstate nexus. So in the Maxwell trial, because it's like interstate commerce. Otherwise, the government does not necessarily have squarely have jurisdiction over a crime, a purported sex trafficking crime that only occurs within one state. Now, that's an oversimplification. There are ways the government can use legalese to federal government anyway can use legalese to charge a whole number of things under the banner of sex trafficking. And the statutes have gotten more and more permissive over the years in terms of empowering the government to make these prosecutions. But what you'd love to do if you were a prosecutor or if you were the FBI investigating this case is, which they would have been at the time. Okay, so we're now in September of 2020. This podcast came out in September of 2020. Epstein has been dead for over a year. I don't know the exact date on which this episode was recorded, but it's a virtual certainty that the investigative attention had shifted to Maxwell. Because let's review. What precipitated the prosecution of Maxwell? Well, it was the eventually aborted prosecution of Epstein, which the government obviously had to withdraw because he ended up deceased in the federal jail in Manhattan. And yet the government, the DOJ, FBI had poured an enormous amount of resources into prosecuting him for a second time after the public uproar, post Me Too and post the Miami Herald series in 2018 that breathed new life into the Epstein saga, caused, an avalanche of public attention. By the way, primary author of that Miami Herald series on Epstein that was so consequential, Julie K. Brown. Julie K. Brown also was either the executive producer or senior consultant or something or other with the Broken podcast that Tara Palmieri was sort of the main character in, along with Virginia. She was the main journalistic narrator in that podcast. So these people have, Tara and Julie K. Brown, they have a lot invested professionally and reputationally and probably, I don't know, interpersonally in, for example, Giuffre, who has been featured as a credible source in some of the work that is the most defining for them in their journalistic careers. Virginia Giuffre is featured giving harrowing testimony in the Miami Herald series. She's on camera doing an interview, and she's like a quote unquote partner in crime with Tara Palmieri in this podcast series, where they're like traveling around together and like pursuing the same mission together. The mission is, let's identify people that we claim. We just want to tell us the full truth so we can solve this mystery, or as Virginia Giuffre puts it at one point, You want to like get all the pieces to this puzzle. Okay, so remember another thing that I just quoted you? Sorry, I'm a little bit jumbled or disorganized here because there's just so much. It's hard to even know what to focus on this story. Remember what Tara said? What Virginia really wants is for someone who is there to say, I remember you, what Epstein did was wrong and horrible, and I'm sorry that was your childhood. She isn't looking to sue anyone else. She simply wants acknowledgement of the abuse. Virginia says, Jeffrey is dead, and we're not coming after you criminally. We're just coming after you for answers to help. Okay, so the question that was posed to the Epstein pilot, where Virginia says, hey, you remember when you flew me from New York to Florida? You remember when you trafficked me for the purposes of sexual predation from one state to another, thus providing the feds with a federal nexus that they could use to ensnare you in a trafficking conspiracy? But Virginia says, we're not coming after you criminally. Huh? There was a criminal investigation underway at that very moment against Maxwell. Of course the government was coming after people criminally. So you think that some guy who might have had a very peripheral connection to either Maxwell or Giuffre is just going to voluntarily, potentially incriminate himself because Virginia and Tara are going around asking them, hey, we're just here as truth seekers. Would you have a friendly, nostalgic reminiscence with us about what it was like in 2001 or whatever with Virginia Giuffre and Epstein? So I guess the question I would have asked Tara is how you frame the purpose of this podcast correct? Because this was framed when it first came out as a journalistic exercise. I'm not doubting that there's journalistic qualities to it, but they're saying, look, we're not coming after anyone criminally. So why wouldn't these people just talk to us? Why wouldn't they help victims? Why wouldn't they contribute to public knowledge around Epstein? Because we're not coming after you criminally. Meanwhile, she asks one of these people a question which, if answered in the affirmative, could conceivably implicate him in a federal sex trafficking conspiracy, which federal prosecutors were literally in the midst of investigating at that time. Because Maxwell was charged in July of 2020. So don't know precisely when that was recorded, but I'm almost positive it was before Maxwell was indicted and arrested in July of 2020. So like we're talking about active, vigorous, highly politically sensitive, huge amount of public anticipation and interest, a prosecution sort of a lifetime for these prosecutors. That was underway. That was in the works while this podcast was being recorded. And they're saying, we're not coming after you criminally. And then Tara Palmieri says, again, let's remember, what Virginia really wants is for someone who is there to say, I remember you. What Epstein did was wrong and horrible, and I'm sorry that was your childhood. She isn't looking to sue anyone else. She simply wants acknowledgement of the abuse. So she's saying that to give the impression to the listener that if any of these people who they're seeking out decline to engage with them, they're doing so for entirely unfounded reasons, because there's no motive here to sue anybody, and there's no motive here to get anybody criminally implicated in anything. It's all about pure journalistic truth seeking. Well, that statement was just false. I would have presented this to Tara respectfully. Again, this is not an ambush. This is about the most topical story in the in the country right now by far. That's consuming public attention. That's consuming political debate. That Congress just got prematurely shuttered and legislative activity terminated because of, amazingly, the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, prematurely terminated the current week's worth of legislative business because there was movement in a subcommittee to potentially force a vote through it, or not through a subcommittee, through it. There was potentially, maybe I'm getting the legislative minutia off here. It was a discharge petition, or there was also something happening in the subcommittee. Either way, the idea was that Mike Johnson figured in order to stave off the possibility of a vote being forced to quote unquote release the Epstein files, which again I'm in favor of, he thought that the best the best course of action is to simply dismiss Congress, disband the current congressional House session, and everybody can go on their August recess 2 weeks early, 2 weeks early. So, to a staggering degree, this story is dominating American media and culture and politics. So, if I'm putting, I think, a reasonable, factually based question to a journalist, a professional journalist who's extremely involved in the story and is seen as a public authority. Tara goes on cable news, as I said early on. I think if you were watching, she's on cable news constantly talking about this. And good for her. I'm not begrudging that. She's on CNN where like the anchor will bring her on and have her be the one to field questions from viewers about Epstein or about any of the goings on here. So the idea is that CNN viewers submit questions that they have about Epstein, and Tara's the one who answers them as an authoritative source on the matter. So, like, I think these questions have to be asked. The question is to Tara, why did you frame, rather, your activities with Virginia Giuffre over the course of this podcast in 2020 as having nothing to do with any desire by Virginia Giuffre to sue anyone? Because she did continue to sue people. Direct quote, she isn't looking to sue anyone else. She simply wants acknowledgement of the abuse. So she's not fishing around for information that could be used to I just saw Richard there, so I'm going to join. She's not searching for information that could be beneficial to her in bringing litigation, right? She's simply looking for an acknowledgement of her abuse from these people who she hadn't spoken to for 20 or 25 years, she says. We're just like staff of Epstein. Because, she did sue others.
Hey, Michael.
She-
got family stuff going on.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I thought I would just bring.
It's okay. We can. What happened with?
I'll give you a quick summary. I mean, I think people can see the video when it comes out. This is so strange. So, for a few days, I had this stream planned with Tara Palmieri, who I think I might have met her in the past. I don't actually quite remember, but I've been aware of her for a while. She's a fairly well-known journalist. She's worked for major outlets. And yeah. She
some Epstein related clips, right?
well, she's a long time Epstein chronicler in various respects. So she's been on this story for years, and she's being featured now, recently, for obvious reasons, as one of the country's foremost experts on Epstein, to the extent that she's like one of the expert analysts that CNN brings on and invites the audience to submit questions that they might have about Epstein, the Epstein case. And then Tara Palmieri is the one who answers viewers' questions about Epstein. So she's seen as like an authority on the subject, right? And she did a 2 podcast series in 2020 that I went back and listened to. And one of them, it's called Broken. You should go listen to it, Richard. I'm sure you'd love it. And the premise of yeah, the premise of at least some of the episodes is that she and Virginia Giuffre herself, with whom Tara became a close confidant, friend, advocate, they're going to go around under the auspices of journalism, because this was like a journalistic production. Julie K. Brown, the Miami Herald woman, she was either the executive producer or consultant. She had some role in, like, she had some like supervisory role for this podcast. And she's the one who, like, broke the Epstein story open. So this is like these the big timers. So Tara and Virginia Giuffre are going to travel to the United States. Virginia is going to fly from Australia to the US, and she and Tara are going to go around and try to locate figures from Virginia's past, meaning people who worked on Epstein's staff or had some peripheral connection to Epstein during the period that Virginia claims that she was victimized by Epstein. So no, this is what they did. This was in 2020. I'm just giving you what the premise is. They do it. I mean, it happened. I mean, they say that they're going to do it, and then they do it. This is a podcast, 2020. And in the podcast, Tara, the journalist, she's like the narrator of the podcast. She explains to the listeners what their whole purpose is here. What's the premise of why they're doing this? And here's what Tara says, quote, "What Virginia really wants is for someone who is there to say, I remember you. What Epstein did to you was wrong and horrible, and I'm sorry that was your childhood." She isn't looking to sue anyone else. She simply wants acknowledgement of the abuse. So the idea being that Tara and Virginia are just in the business of truth seeking. They don't have any ulterior motive. They want that there's not going to be any further lawsuits. So anybody who they try to contact who decline to engage with them, they can't decline on the grounds that it could embroil them in litigation, right? If they're declining, so it would seem, it means that they're just trying to keep the truth under wraps. So it would reflect negatively on the people who declined to talk to Virginia and Tara. Lo and behold, Virginia did continue to sue people. She used, you know what? That'll admit, I'm not 100% sure. She sued Prince Andrew. Okay, so she sued Prince Andrew because post Me Too, New York State instituted a law, or it instituted a window of time in which people who want to make a claim about an instance of sexual abuse that was before the statute of limitations expired, or that had been expired by the statute of limitations, they gave like a new grace period. I don't even know how that's constitutional, but like it enabled people with old sexual abuse claims to file lawsuits.
I think civil stuff, Constitution really doesn't apply.
That's true. Criminal law. There you go. Yeah, you're right. So that was enabled, and in that context, Virginia files suit against Prince Andrew, and then this results in probably her biggest payout of all. She got approximately $15 million from the British royal family. Okay. And did she use any of the material from this podcast? I'm not 100% sure, but she's going around asking, and she's like doing like de facto depositions of these people. So let me give you one example. Yeah.
You were talking to Tara?
Yeah. So I invited Tara. We have been planning to talk for a few days. I initiated it. No, she came. She said that she was tired and maybe she didn't want to stay on for that long. I said, that's fine. Like, whatever works for you. And I'm a pretty friendly guy. I'm a pretty affable guy. I think you would agree with that, Richard. And
I think so, yeah.
I started out, look, I knew obviously that I wanted that she and I have differing perspectives on this issue, but people are always demanding that I seek out people with differing perspectives to show how misguided I am. Not initially, as far as I saw. I wanted to ask her just some basic questions about her relationship with Giuffre. What does she know about Giuffre's death? Because people on the internet all just assume that she must have been suicided rather than committed suicide, which is the official explanation. And Tara agrees that she committed suicide, and the conspiracies to the contrary are wrong. So we talked a little bit about that, and uh, and then I asked her, and like I can maybe tell somewhat that she was getting a little bit skeptical, but like I mean, you could just Google my articles and stuff on this. It's not like I'm trying to conceal anything. And I even told her when I think I told her up front, I have a little bit of a different perspective on this. I hope you're still willing to talk. And she said yes. And wait, but hold on. So what happened was, and if you're watching this on YouTube or X right now, you probably can't rewind and see it because it was on Substack at the time. Like I was going to simulcast it on everything, but then she wanted to go just to Substack, and Substack, please, for the love of God, get it figured out so we can live stream on StreamYard. Like it shouldn't be that hard. But I asked her. So in terms of Virginia Giuffre, how do you conceive of your obligation or lack thereof from a journalistic perspective to take into account in terms of your assessment of her credibility the fact that, as you know, as we've been over, Richard, Virginia Giuffre had to recant her allegations against Alan Dershowitz. And just so people are clear on this, Virginia Giuffre claimed that she had been sex trafficked to Alan Dershowitz, who then committed child rape against her on 6 or 7 occasions. So then the terms of the settlement that then were eventually arrived at, it was worded as Virginia Giuffre acknowledges that she, quote, may have misidentified somebody that she had previously claimed for almost a decade that she had been sex trafficked to for 6 or 7 times. And so like then it seems like an obvious question to me is, if you're one of the foremost authorities on this subject, foremost journalistic authorities, and this person was a journalistic source of yours or journalistic collaborator to the extent that you teamed up for this journalism podcast in 2020 to go track down people in her past and get information and finally get all the pieces to this puzzle. Does her admission of having falsely accused someone for 10 years like factor into your assessment of the credibility of this person? And she just didn't want to answer. I mean, like she got a little bit, let's say, irked to me. She said that it was clear that I hadn't read enough on this matter. I guarantee I've read like way too much at this point.
What do you need to read to know better?
She didn't specify. She said, like, I don't know if you're aware of domestic. Oh, she got a little bit. She got a little bit annoyed because I asked her again. This is a straight, point of information style question. I asked her, "Do you know?" So before Virginia Giuffre died, local Australian authorities had given custody of her children with her estranged husband to the estranged husband, and the estranged husband accused Virginia of being violent and mentally unstable, and the local Australian authorities agreed with the estranged husband, gave the husband custody of the children, which is a little bit unusual because usually like the woman would probably be favored in those situations.
She said,
And then not long thereafter, Virginia Giuffre ends up dead. She says that she's in a horrendous car accident, but the local Australian police say that it was a minor car accident and there was no injuries. Virginia Giuffre posted on Instagram her with these like horrific bruises and says that she was in the hospital and had days to live. And so I just asked Tara, because Tara is a longtime confidant of Virginia. She acknowledged, I think she said this publicly before, that she had talked to Virginia on the phone not too long before she ended up committing suicide. I said, okay, so I just asked her, like, do you know what happened there? And also, like, do you know on what grounds the local Australian authorities barred Virginia from any contact with her children who had been granted, whose custody had been granted to the estranged husband? And rather than just, and you could tell like she was getting peaked at me. And she said, like, if you understood domestic violence XYZ, you would understand And then
Great context. Yeah.
and then well, I wasn't trying to do an ambush or create content or anything. I actually did want to converse with her and go over some of these questions. I mean, so I just don't want. She then accused me. She then accused me of having been enlisted. She said it sounds like I was enlisted by Alan Dershowitz to ambush her.
But yeah, at the beginning you said it wasn't that hostile.
No, it
sounds like it was a really hostile interview.
it wasn't hostile from my end.
Yes, but it seems like there was a lot of tension. Maybe you
Well,
were
yeah, she
cheerful.
ended the.
Seems like you said.
She says she accused me of sounding like I'm in cahoots with Alan Dershowitz to sandbag her, and then she ended the stream.
Wait to watch it. How long did the conversation go?
At the time she ended it, it was probably like between 15-20 minutes.
Okay, yeah, that's not long. Yeah.
No.
Question. Yeah. Okay.
So there you go, Richard. I mean, watch it. And I'm actually trying to be sincere here. I sincerely was not intended to just like create some kind of drama, internet drama.
Sounds like the woman has never been with anything other than fun. Just buying into yeah, it seems like there's never been any kind of critical examination of her work in
Tara, you said in this podcast that you were not seeking out these people from Virginia's past because she was looking to sue anyone. She then goes on to sue someone and get her biggest settlement of all. And also, I didn't get to ask the question. I wanted to. And then also, I mean, I will, before I like make much hay out of it, I'm gonna actually send her another email and just reiterate that, like, look, this was not a sandbag attempt. If you want to try again, let's do it. I'm good faith, etc. No, I don't know. I don't think so. It's a different spelling to the name. And then one more thing, Richard. One more thing, Richard. So at one point in this podcast series, they go and try to talk to Epstein's pilot. So one of the pilots that flew Epstein's jet. And at some point, and I should have, double checked the precise details here, but at a certain point, Virginia gets on either a phone or an intercom at the guy's house and says the following: "This is Virginia Roberts." And I think they're under the impression that this person, Larry Vikoski, is on the other line listening to Virginia. "This is Virginia Roberts. So I used to fly on the plane all the time with you guys. You remember the first time, like, you guys put me in the cockpit with you and David, and I was like, this is a roller coaster, and it was so much fun from Florida to New York." So she's trying to elicit an affirmation from Epstein's pilot that he was party to interstate trafficking and embroil him potentially in the prosecution that is underway at the time that this podcast is recorded. So this was released in September of 2020. I don't know with 100% certainty, but I think it was recorded in early 2020. So Ghislaine Maxwell is arrested and indicted in July of 2020. So this is at the apex of the prosecutorial activity. Virginia is trying to elicit a confession from this pilot under the auspices, oh, let's just reminisce about our times together. Can we have lunch, etc. The pilot, had the sense not to say anything, or at least like spoke to some lawyer. Like any lawyer who's not like deluded would have said, like, literally say absolutely nothing to this person. And but Virginia said so. Tara, in her like little colloquy with Virginia, says like she's not looking to sue anyone. So anybody who wouldn't talk to us obviously has a bad motive. And Virginia adds, Giuffre is dead. And we're not coming after you criminally. We're just coming after you for answers to help. So literally, this is like the climax of the FBI investigative activity where they're trying to establish that Maxwell was involved in a sex trafficking conspiracy and generating evidence to prove that. So, I mean, this is like bizarre stuff, right? This stuff should be accounted for. And I just want to respectfully, calmly, in a friendly, affable way, like I usually comport myself, put these questions to Tara. And it's just like, I mean, I think you're right. Has anybody asked her a skeptical question about any of this? Probably ever. I don't know.
The journalism yeah, leaves much to be desired. Yeah, cool, Michael. Yeah, I'll be looking forward to listening to you. You continue to do great work, and
yeah, I did. Amazingly enough, I had a much more fruitful discussion today with Ben Shapiro. So, I think it was about a half hour, maybe a little more.
He has guests. Is that normal?
I don't watch every day. I think he does sometimes have guests. Yeah.
Yeah, hopefully this will. And I want to ask you, any new news besides Democrats and the subpoenaing and Ben and all that?
Beyond what Ro Khanna personally assured me, not that I know of, but you might know as well as I do because I haven't been following every little development for the past few hours, and this seems to change by the hour. I mean, we're told. I mean, again, this could not be more timely and topical to talk to Tara Palmieri. Todd Blanche, the Deputy Attorney General, said that today he was going to Tallahassee, Florida, to speak to Ghislaine Maxwell.
No, that was covered. I mean,
so what happened with that? Oh, okay. I see. I haven't even got to see that yet. I don't even know what. Like, I'll look.
Overhead footage, and it's just like her getting out of the car, or like footage of Ghislaine going back to jail.
Okay.
Like a car coming out, it's like a little figure going back into the prison.
Oh, and you know what? One thing that Tara said was that look, she wants to convince me that Ghislaine deserves just to rot in prison or stay in prison. And I'm saying, okay, great. Well, we never got to it. I was like, yeah, great. I was like, great. Yeah, I want to get to that. Please make the case to me. I want to engage. Please.
Poor Michael. Just looking for honest, good faith discourse, and it's hard to find.
She also said, she said something like, which I actually don't entirely disagree with this. She said, like, she finds that one thing men are disproportionately and sort of bizarrely fixated on is Epstein must have been an intelligence asset, or there must be this like James Bond aspect to the whole Epstein saga with yachts and private jets and women, and there's something almost like cinematic in how scandalous this was. And Tara was like, no, I guess what women more believe, which could be correct, is that he was just a depraved predator and was like pathetic, and he.
She's trying to.
She's saying people who dwell on the intelligent, on like the spying intrigue or intelligence intrigue. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I guess. I mean, that could be right. That could be right on some level. I don't know, but I think I've crossed enough lines so far in my commentary on this that I'm not gonna choose not to declare Epstein cool. All right, I'm gonna keep going on the stream, people, for a little while longer. Richard can exit. If there's anybody else that people have think I should talk to, make a recommendation, either put in the comments, I'll try to get to it, or send me a DM or email. I'm an open book here. I mean, anybody who disagrees with me violently, I want to talk to them if they can be at least modestly normal in their sort of interaction with me, engagement with me. But even if they're rude, go ahead. Somebody suggests Mike Benz. That invitation was sent. He's not available this week. He's supposed to be available next week. So I'll do Mike Benz. Sure. Look, I'm actively seeking people out who disagree with me. Like, what more can I do? So people want to claim that I'm cloistered or I'm just like, kowtowing to Ben Shapiro or something. I mean, it couldn't be further from the truth. Even when I hosted System Update, it was a little bit short notice, and I was trying to find, okay, who can I bring on who will have the most sort of competent adversarial position to be on Epstein? And I I got Ben Smith. Ben Smith, like, kind of agrees with me on some level, maybe disagrees with me on another level. So it wasn't strictly adversarial, but that was sort of like my motive in seeking out a guest there. Um, so a few more things, and I'm gonna have another article on a bunch of this stuff soon. I posted a review of that movie Eddington today on mtracy.net. So if you're watching on X, if you're watching on YouTube, please remember to go to mtracy.net, subscribe on Substack. If you would be so kind as to become a paid subscriber, that's always appreciated. Um, but of course, you don't have to. Just do whatever. But yeah, I did a review of the movie Eddington, which I saw this week. I spoke about it on System Update. If you watch that, my sort of a nutshell version of my review is, oh my God, they finally figured out how to film a movie from inside my internet addled brain. So if you too have an internet addled brain and you would like that projected back to you on the big screen, I recommend going to see Eddington. If you would not like to have your internet addled brain projected back to you on the big screen, I can't say I completely blame you. I would just add that it's still a very good movie. One of the best, I would argue, that I've seen anyway in the past decade. And it's also hilarious. I was howling throughout, and I was laughing at moments that probably would have disturbed other people in the theater because they would have been disturbed that I was laughing at that moment. So I'm not going to give any spoilers, but like sometimes when in a movie, if like something incredibly violent happens to somebody, it's totally out of the blue. Like let's say, I don't know, they get shot out of nowhere or something. Like there's some unexpected graphic violence. I don't know why, but my instinct is always to laugh. Like I always laugh at that stuff. I can't. I don't know why. Maybe it's just like a slapstick quality to it. I'm just like have morbid humor or whatever. But so I was laughing at stuff along those lines in Eddington, and I would not be offended if the other people in the movie theater found the timing of my laughter to be disturbing. Okay. Um, so more than I could have asked of Tara here. Do you know what Virginia Giuffre's sex trafficking NGO even did? There's not much in the record that establishes what it did or did not do, other than have a website that served as a portal for Virginia's various media activities in relation to her Prince Andrew lawsuit. Virginia Giuffre. Look, this is tough. This would be a tough question, I'll grant, if you're somebody who found this person to be like a paragon of courage and virtue. So, but look, if you're in the journalistic game, you got to take the hard questions, especially if you're going to be asking those questions of others, which I also do. I ask the hard questions and I'll take the hard questions. Anybody who's got one, I'll take them. Let's do it. I got no problem. So, another question I might have asked is, in the Maxwell trial, there was a victim, a purported victim or alleged victim. And I say purported or alleged victim because a witness testifying at a trial, I don't think, based on the Sixth Amendment, should be able to be referred to uncritically as a victim by the judge, for sure, but even by the prosecutors or the like, it's not a neutral term. If the state is claiming that this person is a victim, then that conveys to a jury that it's already like factually established that this person was in fact victimized, and therefore that the people who perpetrated who committed acts against them that victimized them are in fact guilty of what the government is charging. So if you go look at some of those court sort of records or pretrial litigation and so forth, the defense of Maxwell argues that the terminology with which these witnesses are described is prejudicial because it communicates to the jury that like some sort of determination has already been made as to these people's veracity. Because what's supposed to happen on a cross-examination? The defense is supposed to attempt to impeach the credibility or undercut the credibility of the witnesses from a variety of different angles to the best of their ability. But if at the jump they're being called a victim, that gives the impression that they've already attained like a certain title or their claims have already attained a certain veracity before there's been any trial, right? So that's something that the defense vigorously argued against. They also vigorously argued against the witnesses that the government called being able to testify with fake names, sued anonymously, because that too would be prejudicial for obvious reasons. If you're a juror and one of the victims that prosecutors have called to testify and make claims against the person who has been charged with the crimes, if they are permitted by the judge to not even disclose their names and they're adults, I mean, these are not, none of these people are remotely anywhere near being minors or children at the time of their testimony in 2021. They're 30s, probably 40, so anywhere from 20s to 40s, I would think. I think probably 30s and 40s, actually. I would have to double check that. In 2021. But if you as a juror are observing that this person is in such jeopardy that the government or the judge, the court, has to conceal their identity in what's supposed to be like a presumptively public, open proceeding in which the right to a defense is jealously guarded under the Constitution, then you as a juror who's maybe not extraordinarily well versed in like the minutia of courtroom strategy, you might perceive that, like, again, before any trial, before the trial has even begun, that these witnesses are bona fide victims or bona fide tellers of truth or bona fide possessors of credibility, in part because, look, the government is so concerned for their safety. The judge is so concerned for their safety that he's taking she in this case, she's taking the extraordinary step of concealing their identity. So, man, they must really be in trouble they must really be taking great risk to do this. That's like admirable. So I'm going to maybe be, more entertaining of or more receptive to their testimony, and maybe even ascribe it with more credibility than I might be otherwise inclined to on account of them being afforded this benefit. Concealing their identity in court, in open court, and what was the other thing? Now I'm losing my train of thought. Oh, and also being described as victims, basically as like a presumptive label attached to them. And if you think these arguments are offensive, or this assessment is offensive, then you must take offense to anybody who defends a client in court. I'll admit my sympathies do tend to be, or like my natural affinities, by and large, are with defense attorneys rather than the government. I just never been naturally, intuitively inclined to root for the side that wants to throw people in prison. Doesn't mean that nobody perhaps could merit some incarceral punishment. No, I wouldn't say that necessarily. I just for my own. I'm saying just as a matter of like my own, just gut level intuitions. I'm sort of instinctively with the defense, and that drives people crazy because I'll point out that there actually were huge evidentiary problems with the O.J. Simpson case, and I argue that the verdict was correct insofar as the state did not prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Simpson was guilty of the crimes, given how they impeached their own credibility with tainted evidence and all those sorts of things. Now, does that mean I'm absolving O.J. Simpson 100% of culpability for the crimes? No, I don't know for 100% certainty who committed the crime. Perhaps he did. I'm just saying my contention is that the verdict that was rendered, not guilty, is correct because the government has to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the person they've accused of crimes did in fact commit the crimes. It's a high standard. Bill Cosby. Would I argue that Bill Cosby never did anything untoward or illicit, perhaps even predatory with any woman? Never? No. However, the man was imprisoned and then did have his convictions vacated in a scathing opinion by the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, in which the Supreme Court excoriated prosecutors for committing enormously grave violations of Cosby's core civil liberties by how they conducted that prosecution. So I point that stuff out. There are other examples. I mean, people, the government has a burden of proof to when it charges people with crimes. And my instinct is to critically examine whether those accusations have merit. And so that often puts me in a position where people think I'm contrarian, or I don't know what they think, but certain inference are drawn from what I'll admit is my instinctive sort of sympathy or affinity with the defense in most contexts. Now, if I have an instinctive sympathy for the defense in general, doesn't mean that in specific circumstances it might not be proven from my standpoint that a certain defendant did commit a certain crime, right? I'm saying as a general matter, I start from the baseline of a sympathy for the person who has been accused of the crime and an adamant insistence that if the person is going to be convicted and imprisoned, deprived of liberty, then the government must satisfy its burden and also must withstand scrutiny of the evidence it marshals. So the evidence that was marshaled by the government in the Maxwell case was the testimony of these 4 reported victims. And going back to Tara, what would I have potentially asked her? Which is a tough question. I know I'm doing the Trump weave here, so hopefully people can follow along. But one of the purported victims in this Maxwell trial was somebody who went by the first name Carolyn. And let me double check something. Okay, and Carolyn claimed that she was 14 years old when she was first ensnared by this sex trafficking operation enabled by Maxwell and Epstein. Now, I think questions could be raised about maybe certain aspects of the credibility of the story about her being 14 and so forth, but don't even have to get into that right now. I just want to read to you what Carolyn, one of the government's witnesses, testified to at the trial. Question: how do you remember Giuffre Epstein first coming up with that group? Answer: Virginia asked me if I wanted to go make money. Quote: what did she tell you? Sorry. Question: what did she tell you? Answer: that we were going to go to her friend's house who lived on Palm Beach Island, and I was going to meet one of her wealthy friends. Question: and do what? Answer: give him a massage. So this is Carolyn saying that Virginia Giuffre, if we're going to use the concept of trafficking so freely, could have been said to traffic this purported 14-year-old to Giuffre Epstein. And the precise timeline is unclear, but Virginia Giuffre could well have been herself an adult, meaning 18 or older, at the time that she was telling this purported 14-year-old that, hey, if you want to go make some money, if you want to get a quick $200, then let's go to my friend's house, who's a wealthy guy on Palm Beach Island, and give him a massage. So Maxwell was convicted for being party to the trafficking of Carolyn, being culpable for the trafficking of Carolyn. But according to Carolyn's own testimony, her encounter with Epstein, her alleged encounter with Epstein, was initiated and facilitated by Virginia Giuffre herself. And actually, there's a lot of talk about the non-prosecution agreement from 2007, 2008. So in 2007, Epstein agreed to a non-prosecution agreement with federal prosecutors that required him to plead guilty to 2 charges in state court in Florida. He had to plead guilty to a criminal information where it was procuring a minor for prostitution and then a separate prostitution charge. And one of the provisions of this non-prosecution agreement that became very controversial, that stoked a lot of public outrage and suspicion, is this provision, which was unusual, not unheard of, but unusual, that pursuant to Epstein agreeing to plead guilty to the state level charges, the federal government, the federal prosecutors, the feds agree that 4 named women who were female assistants to Epstein, as well as any potential co-conspirators, will not face criminal liability for the conduct that Epstein pleaded guilty to. And so the idea was that Epstein negotiated through his very high-powered, savvy, accomplished lawyers, aggressive lawyers for sure. So Dershowitz, Ken Starr, Roy Black, uh, Jay Lefkowitz, all high powered, all focusing on a certain different area, like a different aspect of the negotiations. Um, yes, they did very aggressively pursue the interests of their clients in this matter, and then eventually the non-prosecution agreement that was negotiated provided for the immunization of any potential co-conspirators to Epstein in related to sex trafficking. Now, the government just decided to toss that out anyway. Eventually, they said, no, throw the non-prosecution agreement in the trash. We are, in fact, going to accuse additional persons of having been a co-conspirator to Epstein. They charged Maxwell with conspiring solely with Epstein, notwithstanding what that non-prosecution agreement provided for. And I'll give you the exact wording just so we can be precise here, because it's really interesting. And I admit, everybody, I am an Epstein obsessive fanatic right now. I am Epstein all day, every day, and you know what? I'm enjoying it because there's endless knowledge to be discovered in this world, and right now it just happens to exclusively have to do with Epstein. That's all okay with me. Um, honestly, I mean, I maybe this is a little weird, but I am enjoying all the research and discussion that there is to be done on this issue. Again, I've done it. I did it piecemeal before. I did it here and there. I think I was reasonably well versed, but this has been the deepest of dives, to the point where I think I'm pretty well set in terms of the totality of my knowledge here. Doesn't mean there can't be more to find or read. Obviously, there can be. Just gonna get this PDF. Mm-mm-hmm. Okay, here we go. Nope, that's not it. Okay. Just want to get the wording. I will read to you the non-prosecution agreement. I mean, this is all findable online for anybody. I just have a working knowledge of where various things are located. And now I'm not seeing the full text, so that's embarrassing. I will find it. Oh, you know what? Because I know why. They don't adapt the exhibits at the end of this report to searchable text. Hmm. Okay, I'm not finding the full sentence right now, but rest assured, the non-prosecution agreement provides that any potential co-conspirators to Epstein will be immunized from criminal liability. And this is, if you followed the case, you basically know this. And so, while in retrospect, a lot of people have assumed that that provision was inserted to protect prominent third party individuals who might have been the recipients of sex trafficked minors from Epstein, all the contemporaneous evidence points to nothing of the sort. It all points to, in fact, a potential willingness on the part of the prosecution and the defense. So the reason why the prosecution were favorably disposed toward the insertion of that provision was because they weren't really interested in prosecuting any Epstein co-conspirators. Because who would have been the potential co-conspirators known to them at the time? It would have been Epstein's younger female assistants who just played whatever the most minor kind of like accessory role to the quote procurement of um, prostitution. Meaning they placed a phone call or they dispersed a payment. They handed out cash, or they did something that facilitated the transit back and forth of some woman or young woman to Epstein. The government could charge them as a co-conspirator. Conspiracy law is incredibly um, permissive. It's incredibly elaborate. It's incredibly advantageous to the government to charge whomever they want for whatever their theory is of the particular conspiracy that they're asserting. So a conspiracy can consist of two people. I have to go double check, but like, wasn't Diddy alleged to have conspired with no one? Like he was also charged with sex trafficking conspiracy, but he had no co-conspirators or no named co-conspirators anyway. Anyway, so it's all just like arbitrary and leveraged by the government to craft whatever case they want to craft. So what the DOJ officials who were interviewed years later certify is that, to their knowledge, the only potential co-conspirators that have been plausibly immunized here would have been just Epstein's younger staff members, or they theorized these potential co-conspirators could have been other victims, right? So other victims. In this initial pool of victims in Florida, there were victims demanding that other victims be charged with sex crimes. I'll give you a quote because this stuff is amazing. So I'm doing an article on this because it's so much to synthesize, but there was one prosecutor who was involved in the non-prosecution agreement and the investigation of Epstein in Florida in 2007, 2008. He says he had the impression that the non-prosecution provision was meant to protect named co-conspirators who were also victims in a sense of Epstein's conduct. Okay, so maybe I misread that at first. He says named, so there were 4 women who were named, and then there were as being immunized from prosecution, and then also this separate category of any potential co-conspirator, and that's what people find most suspicious. But there was at least there were if the wrong I have so many documents running. Okay, here we go. This is the correct document. Okay, so This is so funny. This is from the DOJ Office of Professional Responsibility report, which I've read all 350 dense pages of. This is a footnote. OPR, meaning the investigators for the DOJ, located notes to an FBI interview report stating that one of the victims wanted another victim to be prosecuted. So, what could this mean? A girl who is contending that she's underage, maybe she is, could say that a girl who's like overage or, a few years older or something is the one who enticed her to come to Epstein, and she blames her and she thinks that she should be prosecuted. And so the provision immunizing all potential co-conspirators could actually immunize victims who are being accused by other victims of sex trafficking to Jeffrey Epstein, potentially including Virginia Giuffre herself, because according to Carolyn, one of the 4 victims that the government called to testify in the 2021 criminal trial of Maxwell testified under oath that her introduction to Epstein was facilitated by Virginia Giuffre. And given the extreme flexibility with which conspiracy law can be applied, theoretically, Virginia could have been charged with sex trafficking, you would think, but not potentially if she were covered by the non-prosecution agreement, which immunized all potential co-conspirators. And so what some of the prosecutors who were involved in this negotiation at the time say is that their impression was that there were no prominent people, like there were no celebrities or powerful politicians who were going to be covered by this. It was much more almost banal. It was essentially just establishing that no, they were going after Epstein. They're not trying to get some 18-year-old girl who introduced another girl to Epstein. They're not trying to nail those people for anything, even though they theoretically could, but they're using their discretion not to. And that's reflected by the provision that any potential co-conspirators of Epstein need not, shall not face future prosecution. Then, as we know, the government just decided to throw them in the trash anyway and prosecuted Epstein. I mean, Epstein himself likely ought to have been covered by this non-prosecution agreement. Epstein could have been the most depraved person on earth, but he did have that non-prosecution agreement that the government could just discard after agreeing to it and having it in effect for a decade. Forget Epstein. Do you want to have a criminal justice apparatus where laborious plea negotiations can be undertaken for how long was it? It stemmed from a local case, let's say a year and a half, 2 years. And the terms are abided by the accused. They serve whatever sentence is required of them under the terms of the non-prosecution agreement, as Epstein did. However, he was able to game the system to get sort of more lenient treatment in terms of his term of incarceration, or in terms of his registration as a sex offender. He complied with the terms of the non-prosecution agreement. But forget him per se, right? Joe Schmo complies with the terms of the non-prosecution agreement, and then 10 or 12 years later, there's a huge political uproar, political frenzy. Like the nation is swept by some political, some mass desire to re-inflict punishment on the person who had already agreed to the terms of his or her punishment and had adhered to those terms for a decade. But the government says, okay, the political winds have changed. The political tide has changed, and therefore, you know what? Never mind. We are just going to rip up that non-prosecution agreement. Now, they did try to make an argument that the agreement was not actually a global resolution to the Epstein matter, meaning it was not applicable to every every jurisdiction in the United States. So, in other words, Epstein could be charged for stuff that he purportedly did in New York, even though he had this non-prosecution agreement in place in Florida. But it's a federal non-prosecution agreement. Like, how could that not cover? How could that only apply selectively based on the state? It's supposed to be like a federal resolution, right? There wasn't state charge. Anyway, they try to make some legalistic argument for why it can be just disregarded. Doesn't really hold much water. But then again, in that political climate, everybody is just baying for the prosecution of this guy. They're not going to concern themselves all that much with the technical legal arguments. They just want the guy nailed. And maybe he should be nailed. But I don't know. I think some of us should try to assess things a little bit more dispassionately than just latching on to some emotionally satisfying sort of, clamor. I could go on forever here. For people who have been watching this for a while, I guess thanks. If you've been, I don't know how long have I been on right now? For a long time. I tried to just to recap. If you join late or whatever, if you join late, this started off with was supposed to be a discussion between myself and Tara Palmieri. She's a journalist. She's on Substack, but she's previously worked for a bunch of mainstream outlets. She is a cable news analyst or guest. She's the person that CNN uses as such an authority on Epstein case, that she's the one who are viewers of CNN are invited to submit questions to, and then she'll answer them and tell you everything that you need to know about Epstein. And so thought I was pretty respectful in asking her fair, pertinent questions about different aspects of her, for example, relationship with Virginia Giuffre, with whom she recorded a podcast in 2020, not as like an interview, not as like Tara interviewing Virginia, but they were like collaborators in the podcast. They jointly launched this mission to track down people from Virginia's past who Virginia identified as having been acquainted with her, or that she was acquainted with them while she was in the remit of Epstein. And Tara and Virginia assured the audience that this was not about suing anyone. This was not about criminally charging anyone. They just wanted answers. They just wanted the truth. Turns out Virginia did proceed to sue more people. She actually got her most lucrative settlement of all after this podcast was released. And I'm not 100% sure, but I think there were multiple lawsuits actually she got settlements from after this podcast, but for sure one, almost certainly more. But the terms are kept confidential. So we don't know with absolute certainty. So the whole framing of the podcast was just not correct, I don't think. If she disagreed, I'm obviously open and willing to hear the counter argument, and then we can hash it out. But uh, Tara left before I could even get to that. She left merely upon my asking her about how she reconciles Virginia Giuffre's admission of having falsely accused Dershowitz for nearly a decade of child sex crimes after having elevated Giuffre as a credible source. Not only a credible source, but a journalistic collaborator of sorts, and um, somebody who Tara hails as like a paragon of courage and virtue. I don't know. I mean, then we're all swamped and consumed by this Epstein issue now. So, if the central accuser, the one who basically spawned it all, the one from whose accusations stem this whole notion of a sprawling child sex trafficking ring and blackmail operation, if that person has fatal deficiencies to her credibility, wouldn't that put a lot of this in a very different light? That's what I want to talk with Tara about. It wasn't confrontational, really. It wasn't accusatory. I was trying to be calm, friendly, etc. I mean, people go if you're watching on Substack, you can go watch it. YouTube and X. I don't know that it's up yet. When I end the video, I'll figure out a way to put it up. It was just like for a weird technical reason, it only aired on Substack initially. I was not trying to make any kind of, I wasn't trying to manufacture any drama. I think these are legitimate issues. What can I say? And I'm just going to send her a note after I close off the stream, reiterating that. And we'll see. All right, everybody. This went unexpectedly long. I'm going to scroll through. Let's see if I can scroll through any comments. If you subscribe on YouTube, I actually the Ben Shapiro's people told me I could post my own version of the interview from today, so I'm going to post it on my channel as well. So I'll comment about that. Any comments? Any comments? Does anybody have anything intelligent to say? Let's see. Oh, my kingdom for an intelligent comment. Okay, somebody says Epstein's connection to the Clinton Foundation, office at Harvard, J.P. Morgan connections, and much more deserve investigation. Okay, so seriously, I'm all in favor of investigation, but I find that the people demanding investigations don't seem to know the first thing about the investigations that have actually happened. You know, there was an incredibly extensive litigation pursuant to the JP Morgan matter, right? You know, there have been investigations of his Harvard connections. Clinton Foundation, I'm not sure. Maybe that one should be investigated I don't, for all I care, investigate everybody. But there are investigations that you guys don't seem that interested in actually looking up or examining. You just want to call in the abstract for these investigations that you assume never happened. Wouldn't you? Another person asks, wouldn't you recognizing that Ehud Barak probably participated in this and was close to Epstein, put it in a different light too? What does participated in this mean? Are you saying participated in child sex trafficking and blackmail? Because I'm not conceding that a massive child sex trafficking operation existed until somebody gives me some actual evidence and until somebody explains who would be implicated in that. using evidence, not your supposition, not your hunch, not your weird desires for people you dislike to also be guilty of child sex crimes. Some actual evidence. I mean, we've had 10 years of litigation from every which way on this matter. There's been journalistic investigation out the wazoo. So no, I'm not going to just recognize that Ehud Barak probably participated in this if you're not going to say what this is. Yeah, we know that he had a relationship with Epstein. Nobody's denying that. That's in the public record. But like what people want to draw from that or extrapolate from that, I don't find to be connected to any particular facts. Is it plausible? And I've said this a million times now. Is it plausible that given the relationship between Ehud Barak and Epstein, that Ehud Barak, who as a former prime minister of Israel once presided over the Israeli intelligence services and the military and Mossad, could he have participated in these like meetings where Ehud Barak learned something and then he tells somebody in the Mossad about something that, in other words, he passes along information that derived from his relationship in some sense with Epstein, passes along something to some Israeli intelligence operator, or that's not implausible to me at all. But that doesn't make plausible the sprawling child sex trafficking operation. Sorry. For that, one must have evidence. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. Remember the Cuomo allegations and how Michael exposed how bogus they were? I do remember. People can go look that up. Cuomo running for mayor. Maybe I should do a more thorough. I kind of meant to do a more thorough review of that before the Democratic mayoral primary in New York. Never got around to it, but Cuomo's still running as an independent, so I should probably do a rehash, but I don't know if Epstein summer will ever end. Is Epstein summer going to be Epstein fall and Epstein winter? I remember, if it's funny, in 2015, Trump was running for the Republican nomination. And the media declared it the summer of Trump. And Trump himself sort of picked up on the slogan. He liked it. He embraced it for himself. He's like, summer of Trump. I like that. But the summer of Trump never ended. 10 years later, the summer of Trump has never ended. Analytical failure asks, what about when other people corroborate her story? What other people and what story in particular? There was no corroboration. There was no credible corroboration ever given to Giuffre's accusations of child sex crimes against Dershowitz. Never. There was one other woman who, it was said, filed an affidavit after colluding with Giuffre, Sarah Ransom, that supposedly corroborated some aspect of the claims against Dershowitz, but she too had to withdraw her claim. She made it up. She admitted that she made up wild claims about possessing sex tapes of Bill Clinton, Donald Trump, and Richard Branson. And she filed what, by all accounts, would have been a false affidavit against Dershowitz, reiterating some variation of Giuffre's claims. Sarah Ransom, she's like a hallucinatory. Look up her emails that were finally unsealed by in the civil litigation, where she's like hallucinating. She admitted she made up her claims. So no, there's never been any credible corroboration for the Dershowitz thing. I don't know if that's what you're referring to, but if it was, sorry, you're wrong. Tracy, will you try to join the space that Daryl Cooper will host with Ryan Dawson after their podcast? I'd like to hear you ask him hard questions. I'm not sure exactly what you mean by that. The space after their podcast. Am I supposed to know when their podcast is being held? I don't listen to his podcast, so you have to be a little bit more specific. I sent a message to Daryl Cooper too. People telling me always have people always demanding that I listen to Daryl Cooper because he did a podcast with Tucker, and it totally refutes everything I've ever said about the Epstein case. And then I ask people, okay, I'm open to listening to it. I like to be somewhat prudential with how I spend my time, and there's a ton of primary source material I could read or I could write stuff. There's lots of ways for me to acquire additional knowledge about this matter. But if you're saying I have to sit there and listen to a 2.5 hour podcast, okay, I'll possibly agree to that. But can you at least in advance give me like 2 or 3 sentences explaining what the core argument is or what the key evidence is that they marshal that supposedly undercuts anything that I've said? I mean, can give me a little bit of like, give me a synopsis, and nobody can do it because look, listen, I haven't listened to it, so I don't want to besmirch without having listened to it. But in my experience, a lot of these people, um, a lot of times when I'm exhorted to go, read like some 12,000 page thing or listen to some 4 hour audio or video thing, it ends up being just a potpourri of data points that don't clearly add up to the core theory that people have about this issue, which is that there's a illicit child, a sprawling child sex trafficking, pedophilia ring that was enforced by intelligence and services blackmailing prominent individuals into complicity or silence. I know people really want to believe that that is true. It could be true. I don't rule it out because the absence of evidence is not necessarily a evidence of its absence. But right now we have a very striking absence of evidence, despite 10 years of incredibly voracious journalistic attention to this, legal attention, both on the criminal and legal sides, a million different investigations from of a million different aspects, books written, blah, 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 blah. Um, and so eventually you got to put up or shut up, right? So show me the evidence. Not hard. I would think that's a core tenet of journalism or just a rational approach to knowledge, right? Knowledge acquisition. James, I don't doubt that there was pedophilia going on in this scandal, but the extent of it is unsubstantiated, like Michael shows. Okay. Um, it's been excellent. You went super deep. I think Tara leaving was far better for me. I've enjoyed this walk through the Epstein case, but I'm sure it's disappointing you're not expanding your knowledge. It's okay. Hey, if I can bring more knowledge to people, I'm good with that. Um, I need to discipline myself to write more at length. I did have an article today. I had one a few days ago on the band thing. But sometimes I just like get down. Sometimes I'm just like assembling so much information that I have to kind of just say, okay, that's enough for now. Now distill it, synthesize it, and make sure and write something on it. So I'm gonna try to do that in earnest tomorrow. So again, subscribe to Substack M Tracy. And I'm also doing some original reporting, and I'm speaking to people who are coming out the woodwork. So I'm sorry, I mean it's bizarre. Very few people who have any connection at all to mainstream media, let's say, and also alternative media. Almost nobody who is who are like we're journalistic. I'm not perfect, but I do feel that I do. I, I conduct acts of journalism. Almost nobody like looks at it from this whole thing from this perspective. Why? Because you get slimed. Oh, what are you trying to hide? Are you confessing to some depraved sexual behavior yourself? Um, why do you love pedophiles? you're compromised by Israel, you are being paid by someone, you're on the Epstein list. People are feel free to just heap you with the most vicious defamatory scorn if you say anything slightly counterintuitive, I guess, about this issue. I feel like I'm evidence based. A lot of people, throwing slime, feel no obligation to be evidence based. So, no, I do not support pedophilia. I oppose pedophilia. There you have it. Will that now insulate me from opprobrium accusing me of enabling or excusing pedophilia? Of course not. So, there is nothing that will dispel the just vicious defamations that people will sling at you. But that's fine. I'm sort of used to it at this point. It doesn't have that much of a psychic effect on me. If I were a more normal person who had more normal emotional reactions to things, I could imagine how it would negatively affect me. But thankfully, I don't care. My brain operates in some realm where after years and years and years of being attacked every day brutally on the internet, you get, let's say, inured to things and you can compartmentalize. I don't really recommend it for the average person, but this is my station in life. A couple more here. Wouldn't you, recognizing Robert Maxwell had an established connection to Mossad, put it in a different light? When have I've I mean, you guys, with you'll rattle off like some of the most trivial, almost like universally known or acknowledged facts of this, and then act like the inference the inference that you want to be drawn can be drawn based on the facts that are available. Yeah, Robert Maxwell, after his death, was reported to have like funneled arms to Israel in 1948. I don't know that his precise activities with Israel later on in life have been definitively established. Somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, but it's clear that he was an ardent supporter of Israel, and probably interfaced with some elements of the Israeli states. And then he was buried on the Mount of Olives after he died by drowning when he was out on his yacht. And was it 1991? So yeah, I mean, he's buried in the same location where Sheldon Adelson got buried. When Sheldon Adelson died in Malibu, California, they flew his body to the Mount of Olives for a ceremonial, honorific burial. So yeah, I mean, Israel buries people whom they regard to have been strong benefactors of or assets to the state of Israel in that cemetery. Okay, so and therefore what? So I acknowledged it, I recognized it, and therefore what? Like, what's the logical leap we're making? Because of that, therefore, Donald Trump is covering up a child rape ring? See, I mean, you guys, like, your logical progressions here don't add up. That's not like reasons. It's not like sound logical reasoning. That's just you like throwing out a statement and then expecting me to somehow do the work for you to prove it with or to substantiate what it is that you want to substantiate. The child sex trafficking is more of a distraction, says somebody. The real crimes are the financial crimes. Well, a lot of people are really distracted then. Don't blame me for that. What you're saying, that the MAGA influencers wanted the Epstein file, quote unquote, because they just wanted to expose some run of the mill financial crimes, or maybe even extraordinary financial crimes. But what they wanted exposed was just in the domain of financial improprieties. Really? I don't think so. Aaron says Pam Bondi stating they had thousands of videos, multiple claims there were thousands of victims. Cash claiming Epstein didn't commit suicide, then flipping and saying he never doubted it. So, what do you want me to say to that exactly? Am I denying that Pam Bondi and Kash Patel are ridiculous? I said on Ben Shapiro's show today, Kash Patel should resign. You would think, just as a matter of retaining some dignity as a public figure. Kash Patel is the guy who would go on Benny Johnson's dopey show. And I just said I'm going to wrap up, but you guys always bring me. Kash Patel's the guy who goes on Benny Johnson's dopey show and says, directs a message to the sitting FBI director at the time, Christopher Wray, and also to people in Congress, and says, collectively, put on your big boy pants and let us know who the pedophiles are. Release the quote list, Kash Patel says, of pedophiles. The list of pedophiles, according to Kash Patel, is being concealed by the FBI director. He could just release them, says Kash Patel. Then Kash Patel becomes FBI director. Then Kash Patel becomes FBI director, and sure enough, he does not release a list of pedophiles. Yeah. That's incredibly humiliating. Who's denying that? I mean, when have I leaped to the defense of Pam Bondi as some kind of upholder of justice? So, in other words, the fact that Kash Patel and Pam Bondi are on record saying ridiculous things does not, to me, in any way establish or give credence to the idea that the child sex trafficking rape ring actually exists as people want to imagine it does. It proves that these people are just kind of political charlatans and incompetence, and they're like chasing their own tail, and they've gotten themselves into this ridiculous situation of their own making and of Trump's making. That's what I see this as proof of. Not of the child, not of the pedophilic sex trafficking operation. Sorry. I know people would want there to be more pedophilic sex trafficking. That's another weird thing. People have this weird visceral desire to believe that there must be all this pedophilic sex trafficking for us to heroically put a stop to. Well, I mean, why are you seem a little too invested in the idea that there is this pervasive child sex trafficking, and it explains how society is governed. I find that strange. Bart Party says Tracy's been compromised. He was at the island. Epstein offered him unlimited grilled cheese and fries. Not a euphemism. Michael's a fan of grilled cheese. Okay, I don't know what this guy's saying. Acosta stating Epstein was protected by Intel. I've been over that a million times. Don't I read super chats? Okay, sorry, super chats. Yeah, Sparky. If you recall, Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II and the rest of the royal family disowned Prince Andrew due to the Epstein thing. His allowance and security will cut back, and he's no longer eligible to be king. I don't think that's quite right. Prince Andrew had to step back, I think is how they put it, from official royal duties. And I think he was relieved of certain military honors, or his kind of ceremonial role. He didn't serve in the military; he served in the Falklands War, but something to do with his stature in the military was affected by whatever the royal family decided to do. But he was not disowned, and he was never eligible to be king because he is not the firstborn child of Queen Elizabeth. That would instead be Andrew's brother, Charles, who is the king. And next in line to be king is uh, Prince William, because Prince William is the firstborn son of Prince Charles. And that's your brief lesson on royal succession. Sparky Free Ghislaine, did you miss my super chat on the royal family? Yeah, I'm not going to do the Free Ghislaine hashtag, although, I mean, please, there are enough, I'm willing to say that there are enough obvious deficiencies in how that trial was conducted, evidentiary problems with a juror lying on the jury questionnaire, claiming or falsely certifying that he was not a victim of child sex abuse when, according to him, he was in fact a victim of child sex abuse, and then he used his experience as a purported child sex abuse victim to emotionally regale the fellow jurors with this incredibly affecting story. He then related to the trial that they were deliberating on, and convinced by his own telling of it, convinced the other jurors to look past some of their doubts as to the veracity of the evidence that the government put forward. And, you know, again, I'm not claiming to be some prestigious appellate lawyer, but if you can't make if that's not grounds for some relief in the appellate process, I find that strange. Okay. And then there are other problems as well with the Maxwell trial, including just the length of sentence. I mean, she's not even accused. She was not even convicted of any violent crime. She was not convicted of sexually, by the terms of what she pleaded guilty to. Look at the statutes. She was not convicted of herself having committed like sexual violence on anyone. She's been in prison for 5 years. So it's already a highly punitive sentence, I would submit. And look, I mean, if you are in favor of maximum disclosure, maximum transparency, I don't see what the issue would be with granting her immunity or commuting her sentence and then have her testify. Go ahead, do it. Let's hear it. I'd be interested to hear from her. Wouldn't you? Some Sparky asks, speaking of jurisdiction, why did the federal courts take over the case when it was still a local Florida case? Okay, so I mean, that whole situation is incredibly tangled web, but essentially, when Epstein was first charged locally in Florida, his attorneys were able to influence the direction of the prosecution such that it became clear to parties involved that Epstein was likely, and there were evidentiary problems even in the Florida case on the state level and then the federal level, but it became clear to the federal government, the feds came to perceive that if this state and local authorities were allowed to have sole control of this case, it would result in a sentence where Epstein would perhaps not serve any jail time at all and would not be required to register as a sex offender and would not be required to agree to some restitution through this statute that entitles victims to financial restitution. So Alex Acosta, who was then the U.S. attorney, says that his central aims were to provide a federal backstop, essentially, to the ongoing state level prosecution to ensure that an arrangement was made whereby Epstein ultimately pleaded to charges that resulted in him having some physical confinement, some an obligation to register as a sex offender, and then to agree to some process for restitution. So essentially, Epstein had to agree to accept lawsuits against him in advance and pay out a certain settlement. And, it's complicated. I'm not summarizing that with hyper precision, but that's the basic outline. And so, that was basically the reason. It then resulted in a sort of convoluted process with a hybrid state and federal resolution, and like who enforces what, who notifies the victims if the state charges are what's pleaded guilty to and not the federal charges, and then are the victims that the federal government has identified eligible for certain restitution if what Epstein is now pleading to is a state charge. It's very complicated. So, but those are the basics, I think. It's fair to say. Michael, can you get Curtis Lewa on for a live? Curtis Lewa, he's on the. I mean, I would think this guy's probably asking this because he's in this. Curtis Lewa, I interviewed on the 4th of July, and he's in this montage that I put up a few days ago of my interviews at the 4th of July parade in Staten Island. Then it wasn't the summer of Epstein yet. It wasn't the dog days of Epstein summer yet. It was still when I was wanting to talk to people about Trump bombing Iran. Remember that? Sounds like ages ago. It was only about a month ago. And so I asked a bunch of people about Trump bombing Iran, and I asked Curtis Lewa about it. So if you haven't seen that video, go to my YouTube, and it was recently published. All right, people, this has gone on long enough. This is absurd. Okay, one more check to see if anything interesting. Sophisticated says Cooper actually says he doesn't buy the blackmail ring argument in the podcast. Okay, so what's the argument? I mean, that's interesting. I didn't know that. So what's the argument? Andrew says Dawson will be on Cooper's podcast sometime soon, and they will host an X Space after. I'm not sure what the details of the pod are since it hasn't happened yet. I'm not asking you to watch it. I'm telling you that this is an opportunity to ask hard questions to him and Ryan Cooper in the space. Cooper said he'd host after the podcast. Should be happening. You mean tonight? Or some other day? The thing is, I'm not familiar enough. Okay. I'm just going to signal my willingness to potentially do that rather than qualify it. I did talk to that Ryan Dawson guy on a Spaces thing that I didn't even set up. I was invited to go to the Suleiman space, and then he invited Dawson there, and then I did what you guys are demanding that I do for as long as he wanted to do it. So I'm not ducking anyone. Dan says, you are the Gray Zone's favorite Epstein skeptic. Are there any others? I can't imagine any. I can't imagine another individual whom the Gray Zone would have a favorable attitude toward who is also an Epstein skeptic. I think that's a very tiny niche that I alone occupy. Daryl Cooper is a podcaster who reads up on topics and presents stuff. I forget his name. That's somebody responding to someone else. I've never listened to a Daryl Cooper podcast. No offense against him. I haven't. There's lots of stuff that I don't necessarily feel I need to consume. I'm not like saying that to make a statement. Just if people are asking me about to like be so well versed in somebody's au revoir that I can like just jump into some forum and like ask him the question that needs to be asked. Like I don't necessarily have that ability ahead of time. Like, although but I'm open to it. I think Michael Tracy is the only journalist has support financially. Well, thank you very much. I don't know if that's true. I'm not even going to fact check it. One thing I don't do is if people do financially contribute to me, I try to know. I try to know as few details as possible about who is financially contributing to me. I don't even want unconscious bias arising from knowledge of that. Aaron, who I've read a bunch of comments from, says, I'm accusing you of nothing other than being underinformed on the subject, not by intent. There's just a lot of info flying around. No one can follow everything. Okay, what am I underinformed about? Inform me. You just named like 3 things in succession that I am informed on. But you can't just make like a declaratory statement and then insinuate that it proves what you would like it to prove. You actually have to make an argument for why it proves what you want it to prove. You can't just like make a statement and then leave the work to me somehow to make your argument for you. A lot of people who are frustrated by Michael's approach are frustrated because they feel he's a particularly good journalist on most issues. Okay, if you feel I'm a particularly good journalist on most issues, but not this issue, make an argument for what I'm getting wrong. What am I missing? What's the flaw? Spell it out. Like, do you think it's more journalistically valid to proclaim the existence of a child sex trafficking ring and blackmail network and accuse scores of people of being implicated in sexual depravities for which there's no credible evidence, and then condemn Donald Trump, I guess, for covering up the child sex trafficking? I mean, that's what you think would be the properly journalistic thing to do? I just don't agree. I just think that journalists must be bound or ought to be bound, or I've tried to be bound by the facts. Not like you don't have opinions on things, of course, but they've got to be wedded to the facts. And that whole scenario that you want to believe, I'm sorry, it's just not wedded to the available factual record. So if that's what you think a journalist should properly be doing, like affirming what you just spelled out there, then I think you should reevaluate what your expectations are of journalists. I don't think that's particularly sound. Collatz, that's not really the progression. We can talk about we could talk about things like Trump. You can find pictures of this visiting Mendel Schneerson's grave that begin to make connections at that level, but we don't have to go that far. Let's see what I mean. It's this where stuff spirals. Like people can't maintain a coherent train of thought as to what they're trying to argue for. I know that Trump visited the shrine of Mendel Schneerson, Rebbe, the Rebbe Schneerson in Brooklyn. He actually went with Ben Shapiro. Come to think of it, who I spoke to today. I covered that at the time. I think that was the last October, right? So what are we supposed to infer from that? Because Trump went to the shrine of Rebbe Mendel Schneerson, that therefore he's covering up a child rape ring to protect Israel? Sorry, that doesn't add up. I know you would like it to. I know it would satisfy and I think it would excite you and almost arouse you on a very visceral level. But I'm not here to pander to your arousal. Colette's. But anyway, does anyone feel it's unsupportable at this point that Trump is a hardcore Zionist? See, this is where people get stupid. In order to support the assertion that Trump is a hardcore supporter of Israel, you don't need to dive down these ridiculous diversionary rabbit holes so you can maintain that the reason Trump is radically, fanatically pro-Israel is because of sex, blackmail, blah 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 blah. Like that's the key explanatory factor. Weirdly, like you're doing a reverse version of Democrats saying, "Oh, the reason why Trump is supposedly so pro-Russia, which he wasn't really. He actually is pro-Israel, so I'll grant that. But oh, it's because he's got there are these blackmail sex tapes of Trump getting urinated on by Russian prostitutes in a hotel in Moscow during the Miss Universe pageant in 2013. Yes, I can recite all that exact detail because I am a crazy person. But the idea was everything that Trump does is ultimately explainable by our utmost certitude that there's this sexual blackmail on him that's in the possession of Russia. Really? I mean, is that must everything for you people be about sexual predator? Is there a sexual predator behind every bush everywhere always? Is there sexual blackmail omnipresent in the universe? I mean, like is the pedophile in the room with you right now? I mean, people are crazed about this stuff. It's so bizarre. Okay, let's see if there's anything. Yeah, I can't keep up with the chat. All right, people, I'm going to close out for now. I have a lot more material coming. Again, sorry to be so self-promotional. Subscribe on Substack. Subscribe on YouTube. I'll put out the Tower of Palmieri thing. I don't feel that happy about it, what happened there. I mean, that's not what I intended. I did not intend for her to get. I don't even want to characterize how she got, but to come to the point where she felt she had to abruptly end the stream because I asked what I thought was a perfectly reasonable question, and I asked it in what I hope was a perfectly reasonable manner. All right. Enough for now. Goodbye.